British Film Institute once called Fritz Lang the master of darkness, and once you've seen M, it's not difficult to understand why. The film is an unrelentingly dark picture of pre-Nazi-era Germany in which the characters are grotesque caricatures of a depraved and diseased society. This is a portrait of early 1930s Berlin in which the criminal underworld is cruelly efficient, the police crippled by bureaucratic rules, and women and children at the mercy of both. Roger Ebert talks in his review of M of the film's ugliness. In searching for adjectives to describe the faces of the actors, he says, I fall hopelessly upon the word pig-like. Like Murnau and von Sternberg, Fritz Lang was enormously influenced by the German Expressionist movement in art, and M shows the same preoccupation with extreme shadows, unsympathetic characters, long silences, a relative lack of music, claustrophobic sets, and less than happy endings. And like von Sternberg, Lang was determined to flee Germany for the more sympathetic Hollywood. Born in Vienna, Austria in 1890, he was raised in a Catholic household, albeit one with Jewish roots. His father was the manager of an architecture company, and Lang himself studied civil engineering before changing to an arts degree. Wounded 3 times during the First World War and suffering each time from shell shock, he spent much of his recovery period dreaming up screenplay scenarios. After the war, he was hired by a Berlin company as a screenwriter, but it wasn't long before he was directing film. His melodrama The Spiders was a massive hit in Germany in 1920. He subsequently married his screenwriter, who produced the scripts for a number of his most significant German productions, including Metropolis and Dr. Mabuse, The Gambler. These were pricey productions with lavish sets and dark, wild stories of crime and madness. Metropolis was the first full-length science fiction feature film and the most expensive film ever released to that date. Lang was, like Marlene Dietrich, a fervent anti-Nazi, and his convictions quickly got him into trouble with the New Party line. One of his films features a Teutonic fiend who controls a massive criminal network. The character's outbursts were so inspired by Hitler that propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels called for the film's immediate banning. However, Goebbels was also impressed enough with the film that he called Lang in for a meeting, offering him the job of heading up the new German studio. Lang reports that as soon as he got home from that meeting, he fled the city for Paris, and then finally made his way to Hollywood, where he joined MGM. The story of Lang's American career is less impressive than his earlier work in Germany, but still important in that it established him as a master of film noir, a genre that has its roots in German Expressionism. So, the story of M takes place in 1931 Berlin. A child murderer, Franz Becker, who's played by Peter Lorre, terrorizes the city. In their effort to find the killer, the police begin to round up every criminal in town. Meanwhile, the underworld decides to catch the murderer themselves. Becker gives himself away with one significant slip, and a local beggar identifies him with a chalked M on his back. The Berlin criminal community corners him in an office building and puts him on trial for his life. The killer pleads for mercy, insisting that he cannot resist his murderous desires. As the criminals are about to kill him, the police rescue him so he may stand trial in a proper courtroom. The film ends with a plea from mothers to keep a closer watch on our children. The film's story was inspired at least in part by the career of a serial killer in 1930s Germany. This was Peter Kürten, the so-called vampire of Dusseldorf. Kürten was charged with 9 murders and 7 attempted murders of women, girls, and men. He admitted to police that his primary motive in the murders was one of sexual pleasure. Lang denied that he'd based his murderer in M specifically upon Peter Kürten, insisting that he based the film instead upon a number of famous German murder investigations. In particular, he was fascinated with the participation of the criminal underworld in a similar case in Berlin. He wrote to a local newspaper, saying, quote, "There is one motif used in this case that seems to illustrate particularly well how fantastic real events have become. The idea that the criminal caste would take to the streets on its own initiative to seek out the unknown murderer so as to evade greater police activity was taken from a factual newspaper report and seemed to me such compelling cinematic material that I lived in constant fear that someone else would exploit this idea before me." In that same newspaper letter, Lang wrote that he hoped M's factual, even documentary nature would help alert the German public to future serial murderers. Quote, if this film, based on factual reports, helps to point an admonishing and warning finger at the unknown lurking threat, if the film also helps perhaps even to avert this danger, then it will have served its highest purpose. At the same time, M is known for its sympathetic portrayal of the competent serial killer. As you will see, Peter Lorre's agonized confession at the end of the film adds enormous complexity to it, creating a human face for the monster and attempting to understand the reasons for these terrible crimes. Aesthetically, the film is a masterpiece. In true expressionist form, it presents a world of shadows, harsh lighting, and fearful darkness, in which human mental illness can fester. Some shots are composed to give the viewer a sense of claustrophobia. Others are composed from above, as though to suggest that God is considering his children and judging them harshly. As for the soundtrack, it balances periods of complete silence with cries, sinister mutters, and the murderer's telltale whistle, which is a refrain from Edvard Grieg's In the Hall of the Mountain King. Film scholars frequently point to Lang's breakthrough use of off-screen dialogue and sound effects, which for audiences of the time were new and added elements of uncertainty and complexity to the filmic experience. You'll see that the writer of the assigned article, Horst Lang in this case, who is no relation as far as I know to Fritz Lang, acknowledges that the modern city of Berlin is itself a major character in the film, supposedly driving the Peter Lorre character to his terrible crimes. But the writer considers another approach, one that pits the fledgling Nazi reign of the time against democratic ideals. Lang observes also that the second part of the movie starts with the parallel, brilliantly cross-cut brainstorming conferences of the state authorities and the crime bosses, continues through the race to find the murderer, and ends with his final arrest by the police. And who wins this race? You'll have to watch the film and read the article to find out.